As of 2023, over 4.6 billion people, that's nearly 60% of the world's population, are living in urban areas. But not every city offers a vibrant, livable, and human-centric experience. What type of city do you live in? Hey guys, I'm BaiXu, a licensed architect with a master's degree in architecture and urban design from Cambridge University. And in this video, I'm going to discuss some urban design fails that are surprisingly common yet often go unnoticed. So let's find out whether the city you call home has been designed with care or is completely overrun with urban design fails. There's a lot of evidence that shows high buildings make people crazy. In A Pattern Language by Christopher Alexander, there's this interesting concept called the 4-story limit, which essentially argues that buildings taller than 4 stories create a disconnect between us and the street level. When you think about it, it makes sense. When you're on the 2nd floor of a building, you can easily interact with people on the street, overhearing conversations, recognizing faces, but as you go higher, this connection fades. You shift from being part of the street life to just observing it from a distance. Tall buildings may look cool in a city skyline from afar. At the 4th level, we tend to lose identity with the street. So next time you're walking along the streets of your city, do you feel disconnected and removed from the street life below? And this brings up to the next point. Why do we need to see what's happening on the streets from our home? Because ordinary life isn't boring. You see, as humans, we are naturally drawn to the buzz of everyday life around us. The sights, the sounds, the proximity to other people. There's something inherently satisfying about being able to see the world go by from the windows of our home. Real urban culture isn't just about festivals or big events. It comes from the mundane things we do on a daily basis, like taking our kids to school, grabbing a coffee, running to catch the bus. These routine activities are the heartbeat of a city. And when we design places that embrace and celebrate these everyday moments, we create spaces where people want to be, not just occasionally, but all the time. Take public squares, for instance. People naturally gravitate towards street performers more than static monuments. And think about those street-side cafes, where everyone prefers to sit facing the street, watching the world by, rather than away from the street. It's quite fascinating, isn't it? So if your city is a forest of skyscrapers, it's possible that you feel a bit lost and insignificant because you're missing out on this connection to the street level life. Have you ever strolled down the street that feels vibrant and alive with shops and cafes spilling onto the pavement? Conversely, have you ever walked through a very boring, sterile plaza surrounded by towering, isolated buildings? This disparity in experience can be explained by 2 types of urban buildings: street wall buildings and object buildings. Street wall buildings line the streets, forming a continuous wall along the pavement, and walking through it feels like a safe, enclosed corridor. Object buildings, on the other hand, stand apart, are isolated, and sometimes even set back from the street. While architecturally striking, they tend to break the street's rhythm. The stark openness of object-dominated spaces can feel disorienting and less inviting. So next time you're strolling through the streets of your city, pay attention to the type of buildings around you. If you feel like you're surrounded by isolated object buildings where there is no sense of enclosure, this can explain why you feel the slight discomfort. I think it's very obvious to say when we have greenery and trees in our cities, we immediately feel much happier and better. But we can take it one step further, because not all trees are created equal when it comes to our urban design. Take the American elm, for instance. These trees have this unique concave, arching shape that gracefully define public spaces. And when you line a street with them, they create a beautiful natural archway that frames the space. On the other hand, trees like sugar maples and white ash are gorgeous, but their form doesn't quite shape public spaces the same way, especially when they're young. They're not able to create this enclosed, safe feeling you get when walking under the canopy of an elm tree. Have you ever walked along the street and on the horizon, there was just like nothing? How an urban street ends is an aspect that's often overlooked, but also makes a big difference to our experience of life in the city. So imagine you're walking down a very straight street, and at the end of the street, there is just an empty void. It doesn't happen often, but when it does, it is kind of an overlooked design fail. Urban designers have strategies to tackle this. So one way is to have the street lead to something visually striking, like a grand building, a clock tower, a water tower, anything that's tall and grabs your attention. And if the street is curved, that's when things get quite interesting, because a gentle curve can hide what's ahead, sparking curiosity about what's around the corner. So why does this matter? Why can't we just have an empty void at the end of the street? Well, firstly, we humans have this subconscious need for closure. When we walk down the street, we subconsciously want it to lead somewhere that makes sense to us, like a landmark or a nice view. Without this, we feel incomplete or uncertain, and honestly, it can be quite unsettling. And then there's a natural curiosity. We love to explore and find new things and have things to look at. A street that ends with something interesting satisfies this curiosity. And just like in photography, our brains appreciate a well-framed view. So next time you're walking down the street, have a look on the horizon and see if it's leading somewhere. If not, this could be why your walk is just not feeling quite as charming. When we're walking on the street as a pedestrian, we're not usually taking in the whole skyscraper or the large building in front of us. It's just too big, too tall, too large for us to take it all in. Our focus is actually directed on the ground and first floor of the building that's right in front of our view. The details, the storefronts, the way it interacts with the street, these are the things that really matter on an eye level for everyday pedestrians. Because to be honest, most of the time when you're experiencing your city, you're experiencing it as a pedestrian, viewing it at eye level of 1.6 meters or so, and not from a bird's eye view with aerial photography and videos. So conversely, a building that could look stunning from afar, dominating the skyline, can be actually really disappointing when you're right next to it. It could be lacking these engaging elements on the street level, maybe it doesn't have a very obvious or inviting entrance, and if it meets very poorly on the ground level, it can make the experience for pedestrians very negative. Streets that offer a positive experience use a design principle called porosity. So imagine a street with buildings like this: a bakery with an open counter where you can watch croissants being baked, a bookshop with comfortable reading nooks visible from the pavement, an art studio showcasing its latest creations. This sort of porosity draws us in. It makes us curious about what's happening in the buildings, and it makes the street more interesting and come alive. Compare this to a street lined with imposing facades devoid of windows or inviting entrances. We feel unsure, even a little hesitant. The private life inside feels inaccessible and the streets lack a spark. So next time you're walking down the street, take a moment to pay attention to how open the buildings are. Do they invite you in, or do they shut you out? When we approach a building, especially one we're not familiar with, a fundamental question runs through our minds. Does this building give me enough information to feel comfortable to step inside? In a split second, our brains are asking, does this place welcome me? Imagine browsing a brightly lit bookstore with large windows showcasing inviting reading nooks. Or contrast this with a dimly lit antique or super luxurious store with a heavy door. Uncertainty creeps in. What stuff do they sell inside? Will it be affordable? Will I be judged for just browsing? Our brains are wired to avoid uncertainty and discomfort. So if a building's exterior doesn't provide enough clues about what's inside, we might avoid going into it altogether. So next time you hesitate before entering a building, think about why. Imagine walking to a park or a plaza. Where do you naturally gravitate towards? More often than not, it's towards the edges. As humans, we have an inherent preference for positions where we feel secure and can observe our surroundings without feeling exposed. Edges offer places to stand, lean, or sit. Think benches against a building or railings along a waterfront. Therefore, if the design of a space in your city neglects the edge, being that there are no places to sit, nothing interesting to look at or interact with, then the space itself, whether it's a park or a plaza, will fail because it's just not inviting. So the next time you're in a public space, take a moment to notice how its edges are designed and how people interact with them. Are they bustling with activity, or are they empty and uninviting? I think we can agree that having parks in a city is a positive thing, but the location of where we plant the trees also makes a difference to how positive we feel about the parks. When trees are only planted around the edges of a park, they can create a visual barrier. Now, if you take the same trees and plant them across the street from the park, suddenly the park feels less isolated. It's a subtle detail, but I assure you it makes a difference to how you feel. Consider this really simple but profound rule. If something is the right height, people will sit on it. Generally, people like to sit on surfaces that are between 15" to 20 inches high. This includes the top of planters, retaining walls, column bases, windowsills, even bollards. When these elements are thoughtfully integrated into the streetscape at the right height in your city, they naturally invite people to sit, linger, hang out. If the streets in your city don't provide spaces for people to sit, out and instead are filled with hostile architecture that doesn't allow people to linger. Well, what kind of message do you think it's sending to its inhabitants? No wonder people don't like to be there. So next time you're out and about, just give the streets a scan. Do they provide places where you can comfortably sit? Or are they sending a message that actively discourages you from being out on the streets? Have you ever wondered what makes some streets so much more interesting to walk down than others? Quite often, it comes down to how wide the buildings are structured. When you have narrower buildings, you encounter more variety in a shorter distance. Each of these narrow buildings often offers something different. It could be a different shop, a unique architectural feature, or even a chance to see different people. That's a lot of very diverse experiences compared to just one monotonous building. This variety isn't just visually stimulating, it supports a more vibrant urban life. Let's talk about what makes wandering through a city such a unique experience compared to a trip to suburban strip mall. In the suburbs, activities often revolve around very specific purposes. You drive to a mall, you walk straight to the store, pick up the things you need, and then go back to your car. It's very much a destination-focused experience. Now let's shift to the city. Here, even with a destination in mind, your journey is an adventure in itself. The city offers a rich tapestry of experiences, and along the way, you encounter street art, you hear music, you see diverse architecture, and maybe you even bump into someone you know. The city's charm lies in these very unexpected moments. Not every building can or should be a landmark. You see, landmarks are special because they stand out, they are unusual. But what happens to the city when every single building tries to be a landmark in its own right? It can be overwhelming. It's like every building is shouting, "Look at me, look at me." But if they're all shouting, no one is standing out. These should be buildings of true importance, like civic or institutional buildings. When too many buildings in the area try to be landmarks, the overall quality of the space can suffer. The area becomes less about being a cohesive, walkable, and livable environment, and more about individual buildings trying to outdo each other. It can lead to a worse experience for most people who have to walk around these buildings because walkability is just reduced. If this topic was interesting, I've got some book recommendations for you in the video description below, and be sure to check out my other videos about our urban environment. Thanks for being here. See you again next week. Bye!